In this episode, I'm going to talk about the last of this triad of lenses that I would say that are the most popular choices among street and documentary photographers. We already talked about the 50 and the 35. You can watch those videos. I will put the link in the description. And of course, we couldn't finish this series of fixed lenses without talking about the 28. As you know, photographers tend to suggest to people to find a fixed lens, whatever it is, and to try it for a while and see what it does. And I agree with that suggestion. I use it myself. I tell to people, find a fixed lens that you think works for you, visually speaking, and see what it does. But what we tend to forget often is that it's not only an aesthetic decision, the lens that you have to choose. I believe that how you interact with the world, with the stories, with the subjects, is as important as the aesthetic choices that you make. One thing is going to affect the other, always. Besides of the visual impact or design that you can get from these different lenses, it's going to affect on how you approach a subject. First of all, am I going to be comfortable getting really, really close to a subject? Do I have that confidence? Do I want to express myself that way? Does this closeness to the story serves the story, or is something that I'm looking for because it's going to make an impact? If we think about it for a moment, I think that it's interesting to remember that at the end, when we photograph, we're documenting the world, we're trying to say something, right? And how we say it is going to be perceived by the viewers, by our audiences in a certain way. One of the reasons that I believe that the 50 was very common, at the beginning of this, street photography reportage work, was because the 50 was a common lens to use for either professional photographers and for, families. Yeah, it was a lens that was easy to manufacture. That was very common. When picture magazines started to become more popular, things like Life magazine, for example, focus on big photography, photographers started to become more sophisticated, of course, a little bit more bold. Also, the audience, of course, they started to have more visual literacy, right? So I think that this conversation evolved in a way that photographers might try things that the viewers need to understand somehow to get the concept of the story, to go with the author somehow. With the 28, I think it happened something similar. But in this case, it was less of a choice of the professionals trying to, be bold and try to explore different ways of visual storytelling. And I think that what happened is that for some reason that I don't really know, with the introduction of the smartphone, the companies, they decided to put a very wide lens. So I would say that this influence with the visual literacy of the audience, getting used to see pictures in a very wide format, influence somehow photographers to use wider lenses as well to match that conversation between audience and photographers. So when we choose a lens, when we decide that we're going to go for a fixed lens and we're going to try to develop a narrative that has a signature, that we're trying to find that mythical voice of the photographer that everybody talks about, we have to have in an account our kind of personality. Are we one of those photographers that likes to be in the middle of things, being very involved in the situation? And at the same time, are we one of those photographers that being involved, being very close, having this almost confrontational type of aspect in our photography serves our way of explaining the world? Or are we trying to go with this trend that it's to go wider? This is the first thing that I would ask myself if I wanted to use a 28. We have to be kind of aware what happens afterwards. And I've seen many times people using a wide lens, I believe, because it's popular, not because it goes with their own personality. And here's the reason why I think that it's important to think about it. And I believe that within these reasons, you might find the tips on how to use this lens properly. One of the first things that I would say that I've noticed is that getting really, really close to people just because it doesn't mean anything, right? We know that the 3 pillars of photography is that to get a good picture, we need to have something happening, we need to have good light, and we need to compose properly as well. We need to have a good composition. Those 3 things are going to help us to achieve a good photograph. And if we sustain that in our work, we will have a body of work that is powerful and strong and very well put together, let's say. But one of the tricks about a very wide lens, and I suspect that some people find out that and they embolden themselves to get really close, is that the closer you are to people, the less they think that you are taking their picture. And that's kind of a paradox at the end, because it feels like you're invading, someone else's space. But you realize that there is a comfort in it, because no one thinks that you're taking their picture. They always think that you're taking a picture of something that is behind them, right? Therefore, we tend to forget about the idea of needing to have something happening, and we go with the impact of being very, very close to someone. The problem with that is that that can be something that's appealing for another photographer, especially for someone that is starting maybe, right? But for an audience that are not necessarily aware of how hard or not is to get close to something, what they perceive is that there is nothing going on, that you are closer to a thing, to a person, to a situation. And as I said, it doesn't really mean anything that you are close. If you imagine the picture without that closeness to the subject, and you take away the distortion and the dynamics of what gives you something like a 28, you have to ask yourself, I'm still saying something about this, or is just, that I'm playing with the impact of being really close? Keeping that in mind, I would say that in the foundation of any body of work that we want to achieve, story, narrative still matters more than a given lens that we want to use. Meaning that whatever tool we choose needs to serve a purpose. It needs to help us as the authors of the story, of the body of work, to say the thing that we want to say in the way that we want it to say, right? There is this quote, I don't remember now who said it, but I think that it's very strong, and we have to remember this kind of stuff. It says something like, I don't use the world to say something about photography. I use photography to say something about the world. This is something that we have to try to remember every time that we go out, because it's easy to try things, to experiment, which you should experiment with different things, and go back home, start editing, and feel that you have something very strong because you did something that you haven't done before. Something else that is interesting about the 28 is that we tend to forget sometimes that it's a wide-angle lens, that it was designed for either tight spots, tight spaces, interiors, things like that, in which we don't have lots of room to move and to find things, and to do open spaces like landscapes and things like that. I believe that if you are going to use a 28, think about that. Think about the range and the dynamics not within this one picture, that at the end a single picture is going to be an anecdote. As strong as it might be, it will be just a part of the rest of the body of work. But you still need to keep a rhythm, a dynamics. And sometimes 28 wide-angle lens, it can be very strong in a situation in which there is no one in there, in which the space, the location is saying something. You can capture a sense of atmosphere. It can be very powerful to use the properties of that lens in a way that it's not really just getting close for the sake of getting close. Going in places as well, trying to do environmental portraits, maybe do things that are going to make sense for the story, and use the tool accordingly. I would say that what makes you you is not going to be the tool that you are using. I think that you can try different tools, different lenses, different cameras, whatever it is. But what makes you special always will be the things that you notice. You might notice things that might need the use of a different kind of tool, maybe a macro lens, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. But the thing is that I would suggest to you to say, okay, I want this impact because it goes with my personality. I want to be in the middle of things. I want to translate this sense of dynamics and power and drama to the viewer. And that's my intention. Therefore, I'm going to use a wide-angle lens. Something that is quite important to have in an account as well, if you're going to use a wide-angle lens, is that composing with it, composing properly, becomes very complicated. And again, when we are photographing out there, we have to think that we are trying to say something with our photography, something to someone else. And the way that we structure a picture for someone that is not a photographer can read it is through composition, right? And with a wide lens, what happens is that we're going to have so many things in the frame that it's going to be hard to compose. Nevertheless, we have to try to do it properly, right? There is this phrase that people say that you have to be accountable for everything that is in the frame, right? You have to have a reason for it. I think that with a wide lens, if you are going to like that kind of style, you have a little bit more room for dynamics to dirt up the frame if you want. We can imagine people like Bruce Davidson, Gary Winograd. They were not the most precise photographers, but it wasn't the point. That being said, they compose intentionally because they were using the tool in a way that made sense. If you think about it, a big part of their work was the actual space. That's why they were using something that is wider, right? Talking about the subway, for example, in Bruce Davidson's case, the subway is the title of the body of work, right? And therefore, it's a presence in the story. Therefore, to use the space as part of the story, as a subject itself, is going to be key for the success of the story. Of course, the dynamics and being close and having this confrontational aspect of the things happening in the subway was also the intention, right? And the point of this is that whatever you choose to use, choose it because it serves a purpose with your way of seeing, your way of experiencing things, and the way that you want to express yourself. If you're interested in dig deeper about these ideas and how you can use the tools properly, you want to share your experiences with like-minded people, with photographers from all over the world, I would suggest to you to become a member of the Raw Society. In there, we have different voices from different places, but with the same objectives, which is to tell better stories, to grow as photographers. So I would invite you to look at our website, and if you find it interesting, join us, and see you there.